Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at the first release of Black Square's Steam Gauge Overhaul series. That is of course the Analog Caravan, which updates the default Microsoft flight simulator Cessna 208B. As the name would suggest, the aim of the series is to upgrade a number of default Microsoft flight simulator aircraft that currently make use of glass cockpits. But the product certainly purports to give you more than just a few steam gauges. The aircraft is actually marketed as a study level add-on. The Caravan has been given a completely new interior as well as various avionics options, and apparently no piece of equipment exists in the Caravan that hasn't been referenced to a real-world unit. It is worth stating right off the bat that there are limitations to the overhaul, and Black Square are pretty clear about that. Whilst the gauges and the systems have seen pretty drastic improvements, the modifications to the aircraft's flight model are more minor in nature. The Analog Caravan also still makes use of the default Microsoft Flight Simulator 208B sounds, and the external model of the aircraft remains unchanged from the default version of the aircraft. Anyway, the product has just released over on Just Flight, and they were kind enough to let me take a look and showcase it to you today. I rather like the idea of the product overall. Certainly most of the default aircraft within the sim are not lacking in the graphical department. So if the product does do what it says on the tin, then I think it's a great way of upgrading the default aircraft and hopefully giving them a new lease of life. In conjunction with our look at the Analog Caravan today, we're also going to be taking a look at the recently released Orbx South America mesh. The mesh actually includes the Falkland Islands, and we are currently on the ground there on Saunders Island. Saunders Island, from what I could see, is actually utilised as a sheep farm in the real world. So we set off earlier on this morning from Stanley, hypothetically delivering some agricultural supplies over to the island. Our routing has us departing out of Stanley. We'll track initially over the Mount Pleasant VOR, and then we'll head westbound over towards the western side of the Falkland Islands. As usual, we'll be carrying out a full flight to get a really good feel for the level of systems depth that Black Square have created with the Analog Caravan, and hopefully, as I say, we should get a good look at the Orbx mesh en route as well. As always guys, I do hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. We're now going to time travel back to earlier on this morning, where we find the Cessna 208 on the ground at a very windy Stanley airport. So good morning and welcome to the cockpit of the Black Square Cessna Grand Caravan. Overall I think Black Square have done a nice job with the internals of the aircraft, of course particularly with the gauges. We'll certainly be taking more of a look at that throughout the flight. For now though, the plan is to get the 208 started up as quick as we can here. We'll get ourselves airborne, and once we're heading westbound out towards Saunders Island, we can obviously discuss the product in quite a bit more depth en route. So for now, running through the before start checks. The pre-flight inspection has been completed. Passenger briefing is not required. The cabin door is closed and locked, although it's worth noting currently still the doors are inoperable on the aircraft, I presume as a result of using the default external model. The DV window does however work. Anyway, the park brake is set. Seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure. Switches are all off. Ignition is set to normal. Circuit breakers are checked in. They are now operable, which is great to see, and they do have associated systems effects as well. No random failures modelled as far as I'm aware. Fuel tank selectors can go on. Radar is off. Air conditioning is off. Bleed air is off. And the cabin heat mixing is set to flight. Emergency power lever is set to normal. Power lever is set to idle. Prop lever can go fully forward. Fuel condition lever is set to cut off. Fuel shut off is in. Battery switch can come on. For the wing flaps, we have the flap selected up, indicating up, and we'll just make a quick visual check there as well. So flaps looking good. We'll test the annunciator panel. And sure enough, they're showing the correct indications. We're going to be starting on the battery, so once again the battery master switch is on. For the battery voltage, we're looking for a minimum of 24 volts, and currently showing around 26, so well within limits. Again, just checking the emergency power lever is set to normal. Prop area is clear. We'll open up the DV window and let everyone know we're about to start. Clear prop! And we can close that up once again. The start itself then, the fuel boost pump can go on. On the annunciator panel, we're expecting to see the auxiliary fuel pump on indication. The fuel low pressure caution should be out, which it is. And on the fuel flow indication there, showing 0, which is what we're expecting to see. So we can hit the starter. Ignition can go on. Monitoring the engine instruments here as the engine spools up. Oil pressure rising. There's our indication on the NG. We're looking for at least 12% NG before we introduce the fuel. And there's our 12%, so the fuel condition lever can go to low idle. That's all gated, so nice and easy to use. We're looking for a maximum of 1090 on the ITT. We peaked well below that, around 750 degrees Celsius. Oil pressure now looking good, up in the green band. We're expecting to see the engine stabilise above 52% NG. And it looks like we're stable there around 60%. So we have a good start. The start switch can go off. The starter energised caution is out. Engine instruments are checked. Generator will reset. And again, the caution is now extinguished. Fuel boost can go to normal. Standby power can go on. Avionics masters for the 1 and 2 buses can both go on. And on the lights, we'll get the nav lights on, beacon on, seatbelts and the no smoking signs can all go on. Battery is now nicely charged. Just checking the generator output there. And everything looking good. So running through the last of our after start checks, the heating, ventilation and defrost will leave as is. Radios we can set up. So just initialising our GTN-XI. We'll wait for the TORS test to complete.
TORS system test OK.
We'll clear our messages. And we'll set up the GTN-XI later on down at the runway once we carry out the before takeoff checks. Com radios we're not going to need. Nav radios will tune up the Mount Pleasant VOR, which is on a frequency of 114.7. And transferring that across, you can see we have visually identified there Mike Tango Papa. Transponder can go to standby, same for the weather radar. So the radios are set. We're good for the taxi, so taxi light can go on. Nice short taxi for us. You can see there's a pretty cracking southerly headwind for us today, so we're going to be departing off the southerly runway, which means just taxiing out at our 1 o'clock. Park brake can come off. All clear on the right. And we're fairly close into this fuel bowser on the left, so we'll just swing out to the right a little bit more here. As we come up on the power lever there, the auxiliary fuel pump caution's extinguished as per the checklist. And all clear now on the left wing. So just joining onto the main taxiway straight ahead. For the purposes of our flight today, the east-westerly runway is inactive. Nevertheless, we'll just make sure everything's clear both on the approach end and on the upwind end. I'm not entirely sure whether they still use the north-south runway here in Stanley, but it's still modelled in the sim and it certainly makes sense with the wind today, so we're going to take it. And it's a nice little test as well of the Caravan's short takeoff performance. So holding short runway 18, we'll come onto the brakes. And once again, the park brake can go on. The before takeoff checks, the park brake is set, seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure, flight controls are full and free, flight instruments, we'll reset the altimeters. And the altimeters look good both on the left and on the right. HSI, we're showing a westerly heading there, same on the compass and same there on the right. We'll set up the rest of the HSI later on once we've set up our flight plan. The flight instruments look good. Fuel boost, again, is set to normal. Fuel tanks, both selectors are on. Fuel quantities, doing about 80 gallons there in each main tank. Fuel shutoff is checked fully in. Elevator, aileron, and rudder trim are all set for takeoff. Power check. According to my checklist, we come up to 400 foot-pounds of torque. I'm not sure whether or not there are different variants of engine used in the Caravan, but what I see in my checklist doesn't quite seem to apply here to the aircraft. I do seem to recall there may well be 2 separate engines used in the aircraft. I'll run through my checklist, but we may notice a couple of differences along the way. So we've got 400 foot-pounds of torque there. We'll work our way through the ammeters and the voltmeter. So generator output looks good. Battery voltage looking good. We'll go back to battery for now. We'll check the inertial separator. Not showing a drop there in torque. According to the checklist we should, but again I think we're probably a little bit low there on the torque setting. I believe that the inertial separator is now modelled, as opposed to the default version of the aircraft where it isn't. Anyway, the engine instruments are checked. Overspeed governor test, for the same reason, probably isn't going to work at this power setting, but again it is modelled in the aircraft. We'll come back to idle. Throttle friction has been adjusted. Pitot static heat can certainly go on. It's a pretty cold day outside, same for the stall warning heat. Ice protection, not required for now. We're pretty clear of any visible moisture. Again though, we will keep an eye on the weather. There has been a little bit of very light snow passing through the area. Avionics and radar. Again, we'll leave the radar in standby for now. We can set up the flight plan. So departing out of Stanley, heading out towards Mount Pleasant, which is Mike Tango Papa. And after that, tracking over towards Saunders Island. It's not actually in the database, but I've created a user waypoint for that. And the code is Sierra Foxtrot, Sierra Foxtrot. You see that's South 51, West 60, so we'll select that. We'll just visually check the flight plan there on the map page. So departing out of Stanley out towards the Mount Pleasant VOR. And then tracking out towards the west towards Saunders Island. Everything looking good there. We can zoom back in for the time being. And again, the nav radios are set. The track outbound towards Mount Pleasant 248, so we'll set that on the CDI bar. As always in the sim, it's going to take us a little bit of time here just to slew the needle around. There's 260, 250. Unfortunately, 248 just hidden under the nav flag there, but we'll refine that later on once we're inbound. And same on the heading bug. We're going to be departing off runway 18, so we'll set that on the heading bug. And just coming around onto 180. So good there on the heading bug. GPS nav switch is set to nav for now. We're going to track inbound on the Mike Tango Papa VOR towards Mount Pleasant. We'll track outbound in nav in towards Saunders Island. That way we get to test both parts of the aircraft systems. So avionics and weather radar are set. We'll just set the autopilot there as well. We'll probably go for a cruise altitude of around 4,000 feet, but that'll be somewhat dictated by the cloud layer. We definitely don't want to be flying in and around that today with the current temperatures outside. Anyway, landing lights can go on. Same for the strobes. We'll leave the recognition lights on there as well. Transponder can go to out. Annunciators are checked. Just the auxiliary fuel pump there. Expecting to see that extinguish once we come up on the power. It's going to be a short field takeoff, so we'll select flaps 20. And we have flaps 20 indicated, just again making a visual check. Everything looking good. Windows are closed. Brake can come off. And the fuel condition lever can go to high idle. So we're all clear on upwind. And same there on final. Cleared to take off runway 18. Okay, so we are all set and ready to go here on runway 18. Still a pretty significant crosswind component out from the right, so we'll just set a little bit of right aileron there to counteract that. And again, short field takeoff, so confirming that we do have flaps 20 set. Park brake can come off. We'll hold the aircraft on the brakes. So feeding in the power, looking for 1900 foot-pounds of torque. And the aircraft wanting to creep on the brakes now, so coming off the pedals. Power is set. Temperatures and pressures looking good. Coming back on the yoke. Nicely airborne there, climbing away at 85 knots. We're now clear of any obstacles. And through 85, so we can go flaps 10. Just wait till we come up through 300 feet to do that. And wait until we come up through 500 feet to make the turn. There's 500 feet. And up through 95 knots now, so the flaps can come up. Picking up the Mount Pleasant radial now, slightly out to the right of track. That's fine. As we come onto the heading here, we should come onto the radial more or less. Pitching for a climb of around 110 knots. We'll get that heading bug as well, round onto our desired course. And coming up through 2,000 feet. As I say, planning on 4,000 feet for now, but I don't know whether or not that's really going to have us clear of the cloud. We'll settle down at 2,500 for now. We'll see how we go. We might be able to just weave our way through the terrain. I don't really want to climb too high today. Half of the point of the flight is to enjoy the Orbx scenery. So just pitching ourselves back down towards 2,500 feet. For the cruise then, ice protection is set as required, pitot static heat is on. Prop, we're looking for between 16 and 1900 RPM. We'll come back towards 1600. And on the power lever there, we're looking for 1865 foot-pounds of torque. So we're pretty much good in terms of our power setting. Temperatures and pressures looking good. Just having to trim quite a bit further forward here to get the aircraft wanting to descend. We're just stay on our present heading for now, just to track us gently inbound towards the radial for Mount Pleasant. We'll set 2,500 on the autopilot unit. There's 2,500. Nicely leveled off now at 2,500 feet. Aircraft's pretty well trimmed out. We'll just center up that heading bug once again. Autopilot master can go on. We'll come into heading and out. As usual, the autopilot not capturing there where we want it, so it still has all of the usual Asobo bugs there. Of course, to be expected, we are using the Asobo avionics. Get ourselves back down towards 2,500 feet. And it looks like we are now capturing at 2,500. Just coming onto our CDI, so we'll go into nav. And as I say here, the plan is to track inbound on nav towards Mount Pleasant. And we'll then track outbound using GPS guidance. Not much weather today, but we'll turn the weather radar on nonetheless. Again, I presume that's just going to be using the default Asobo avionics there when it comes to the weather radar display. So we're showing 18 miles to run inbound towards Mount Pleasant. Just coming into their airspace currently. Of course, assuming we've been cleared through that for the flight today. Interestingly there, it doesn't look like we're picking up the DME for the VOR, which is a little bit strange. Anyway, in terms of our power settings, so we've got about 1,800 foot-pounds of torque, about 1,700 RPM. That's giving us a cruise speed of around 162 knots indicated. And fuel flow, we're looking just below 400 pounds per hour. I'm not familiar with the Caravan, but I'll leave that to you to decide whether or not that's an accurate set of parameters in terms of performance. We'll leave the landing lights on since we're cruising away over at low level. You can see the Mount Pleasant runway lights there off in the distance. And overall the Orbx mesh pretty nice. The original plan was actually to head out towards Peru. We've flown there pretty recently, so I thought we'd head over towards the Falkland Islands and explore some different scenery. There's a little bit more high terrain as well on the westerly island, so we should get a pretty good feel for that later on. Speed over the ground currently 124 knots, so we're definitely suffering a little bit at the moment with that southerly wind. That should ease off once we track out towards the west. Okay, so we just turned overhead Mount Pleasant. Currently getting a little bit wedged in here between the hills and the cloud. We'll just come out slightly to the left of our heading here just to work our way around the terrain. Anyway, as I said, we'll go into GPS on the CDI. We are now picking that up, but we'll stay in heading for the time being just to negotiate our way around the hills here. With that strong wind out from the south, getting blown towards the hills as well, so coming out onto pretty much a heading due west there. You have to forgive me on the DME issue there. That was actually a mistake on my part. The VOR located at Mount Pleasant is a VOR only. It's not VOR DME. Just clear our messages again, purely related to airspace. Anyway, 2,500 feet for now looks good. We'll just work our way around the high terrain, stay down below the cloud layer. So I thought one of the best ways to outline the differences between the default Caravan and the Black Square Caravan was basically just to work my way through some of the features given in the manual. It's quite hard to judge the differences between a default product and an adapter product by purely investigating it myself, so I thought it'd be easier to just make it very clear what's actually provided with the product. So in terms of the changes, the main changes apply only to the internal model of the aircraft. The external model is entirely default, there's no change there. We've already talked about the doors. Internally though, of course, you're getting the interior gauges and the placards as well. They're all accurate based off a real-world Cessna 208. I do think the gauges are modeled very nicely. They are very easy to read. Overall, they seem pretty smooth in terms of operation. They look pretty authentic. 4K textures as well, PBR rendering of course in the cockpit. Texturing in terms of the leather and the materials all looks pretty decent. It's not up to Carenado standards, but nonetheless it's up to pretty much average Microsoft Flight Simulator standards, I would say. The cockpit is really where you'll see most of the changes, namely with the gauge layout and of course the avionics, as well as some systems failures we've already discussed there. For example, the circuit breakers are functional, and just to demonstrate that to you now, if we for example pull the flat motor here, we've still got a standby flat motor model, but we'll pull the circuit breaker for that as well. And currently we're well above the flap limiting speed, but no issues to worry about there since we pulled the circuit breaker. You can see the flaps are currently inoperative. So all of the circuit breakers are modelled as far as I can tell, which is great. And again, they do all have associated systems effects. The only slight downside there's no random failures. That would be nice to have, but nevertheless, it's good to see the systems modelled. To say there's no random failures is actually slightly inaccurate. There's no systems failures modelled such that the circuit breakers would pop out as far as I'm aware, but you still do get some systems failures. For example, having had the aircraft sat on the ground for a bit too long earlier, we actually suffered a battery overheat, and that led to a failure of the battery. Similarly, you can overtorque the engine, you can actually damage the engine, and indeed that will lead to a failure as well. And the engine failure modelling is based on how well you actually treat the engine, so if you're only slightly exceeding tolerances, then the engine may fail after some time. If you're grossly exceeding any tolerances though, then you can expect the engine to fail pretty quickly, and for example, if you over-torque or over-temp the engine, it'll actually fail more or less instantaneously, I believe. So there is some failure modelling, as I said, which is really nice. There's no persistent state in terms of failures. As soon as you reset the flight, the failures are reset as well. Otherwise though, pretty much everything seems to be functional in the cockpit. I've yet to find a switch that isn't actually modelled. Certainly everything seems to be clickable, and there does seem to be associated modelling behind those switches. So I would say in terms of the systems, the aircraft is relatively steady level, which is very nice to see. In terms of the flight model and the engine model, not so much, but we'll talk more about those in just a moment. In terms of the systems then, again quoting Black Square's own material, they have improved the turbine dynamics in terms of the ITT, the torque, the NG, the fuel flow. The internal separator is now modelled, as I mentioned. Same goes for battery charging circuitry as well as load shedding and the ability to cause a hot start. As I mentioned earlier, there is some state saving on the aircraft. That namely relates to things such as radio settings. I believe as well it will save, for example, your heading and CDI bar settings. So when you come back to the aircraft, some things will be as you left them, but for the most part it's not like the rest of Just Flight's lineup where pretty much everything has a persistent state. The crew and passenger oxygen system is also modelled, and that will actually not only model based on altitude, but also in terms of passenger occupancy, and even more impressively still, what Black Square call biological demand. So essentially if you load up a heavier passenger on board the aircraft, they're actually going to use up the oxygen supply a little bit more quickly. As I mentioned, the standby flap motor circuitry logic is modelled. There are associated switches and circuit breakers there. The aircraft does actually come with a pretty comprehensive manual and checklists as well, which is really great. There's quite a lot of detail about the avionics of the aircraft within the manual. And I should really have used the checklist, but I did actually elect to use a real-world checklist instead. Flight dynamics, the aircraft is a little bit weaker on. There have been some, even Black Square themselves say, slight improved changes to the aircraft's flight model, so you're still essentially getting a default aircraft, at least in the flight modelling department. And the same is certainly true with the sounds. For the most part, the aircraft uses the default Cessna 208 sounds, although I think there are a few additions there in terms of switch and cockpit instrument sounds, things of that nature. So there's no doubt that overall the Black Square Caravan is significantly improved upon the default Caravan, but you'll still certainly see a lot of the default Caravan's DNA, I would say, in the aircraft. Anyway, as I said, I thought we'd just run through the Black Square manual there just to highlight some of the changes you can expect. Anyway, just coming up on the westerly edge of the eastern island here. So we've got Grantham Sound just off at our 11 o'clock. You can already see the western island there off in the distance. So we're just coming up on the midway point across the western island currently. We've got the highest of the terrain just off the left wing. Again, overall a really nice effort from Orbx with the mesh. It certainly adds a little bit more to the sim. Does look like we just picked up a little bit of light icing there coming through. Really just a few wisps of cloud, but we'll take the windshield icing on for now. Don't think we're going to need the prop there or the airframe looking pretty clean there, so not going to require the boots either. Anyway, coming up on about 13.5 miles to run now towards Saunders Island. You can almost make that off the nose, it's just buried away behind that little bank of cloud there. We can start getting the aircraft set up for the arrival then. So running through the descent checks, ice protection is set as required, pitot and static heat is on. Altimeters are set. GPS nav switch, we'll leave in GPS for the time being, we don't need it in nav for now. And power is set as required. That's our descent checklist complete. We'll actually descend down a little bit more here. We're just coming up into the tops of the cloud layer out towards the west, so we'll come down to 2,000 feet. We are clear of the worst of the high terrain at this point anyway. So we'll come out, we'll go VS minus 500. And then hopefully we can avoid just picking up this little bit of icing there that we've got on the windshield. Having turned out towards the west, we've lost quite a bit of that headwind now, doing 146 knots over the ground. Almost coming up on 170 knots indicated with the descent currently. So we'll keep a good eye on the airspeed. But we shouldn't be overspeeding the aircraft in this configuration. Anyway, the plan is to head over towards Saunders Island, of course, and we know the wind's out from the southwest, so we'll overfly the airfield, take a look at the runways. We should have a couple of options there. Memory serves me correctly, we've got 2 east-westerly runways, 1 dirt, 1 grass, and then 1 a little bit more north-south. We'll see what the state of the runways is like, and we'll pick the most appropriate one for the landing. Of course, trying to pick one with a headwind component if we can get one. Just coming up on 2000, we have gone into out once again. And speed rolling back again now that we've finished up on our descent. Looks like the windshield is clearing up, so we've obviously made our way through that icing. We'll get rid of the windshield de-ice for now. And showing 8 miles to run now. Just looking at the map display. You can see the edge of the land, the little spit of land there off tower 11 o'clock is on the chart. So Saunders Island just off to the west of that, and you should just about be able to make out the location of the airfield as well. It's pretty much abeam the spit of land there that we just spoke about. So we'll take out the autopilot, we'll manually fly for the rest of the sector here, just to get a bit more of a feel for the flight model. I have to say overall it's difficult to say with any certainty that there's significant changes to the flight model. I would say generally speaking the aircraft still feels quite similar to the default Cessna 208. Nonetheless, I mean the 208 in the sim flies reasonably nicely, so it's nothing egregious. But as I said earlier on, the flight model isn't as study level as the systems modelling. And Black Square are pretty clear about that. They say themselves there's only been minor alterations to the flight model of the aircraft. So I think we can make out the runway just off the nose. That looks like it's probably the dirt east-west runway. Get my downwind checks out of the way ahead of time, so brakes are checked and off. Undercarriage is down, mixture is rich. Fuel selectors are both on, fuel quantities are checked. The checklist doesn't call for the fuel pump to go on, so we'll just leave that in normal for now. Radar can go off. Autopilot is off, and wing flaps will obviously set later on. Again, it's going to be a short field landing, so there'll be full flaps approaching at 78 knots. And we'll be using full braking, full beta range on the landing. We'll just continue the shallow descent that we've got going here down to around 1500 feet. The airfield, of course, down at sea level. And again, just coming through a few wisps of cloud here as we approach inbound towards the field. You can make out the runway quite a bit more clearly now off tower 11 o'clock. And we'll probably go with the dirt runway there. It's significantly longer than the grass runway. It's out to the west, but again, the wind's out from the southwest, so there's no optimum solution here with the alternate grass runway being north-south, and very short actually. So we'll start reducing the torque a little bit here, just to slow up on the airspeed slightly, give us a good view of the field as we make our pass. We'll come back to 1500 foot-pounds of torque. I think we'll actually just continue here in the downwind and come back landing out towards the east. That way we're going to get a little bit more of a headwind from that southerly component. Just confirming we do have the correct strip here. So it does all look to be clear. As I say, just continuing on the downwind then, we'll continue down to 1,000 feet. And we'll keep coming back on the torque here, really start slowing up now. So all the way back on the power lever. As we briefed, looking to make the approach 78 knots. We'll just wait until the speed's back in the white arc and we'll start configuring. So good now on the speed, we'll take flaps 10. And we'll go flaps 20. We'll just hold off full flap until we're on fine approach. And we'll go flaps full. Pitch can go back to fully fine, undercarriage is down, flaps are set. Of course we don't need a landing clearance, the runway is clear. And getting that speed back. Just coming up on 70 knots, so a touch slow there, we'll just increase the power again.
$500.
Okay, let's check to 500, looking good on the speed. And still quite a crosswind here, you can see that pushing the nose out to the right. Anyway, cutting the power, we'll try and get ourselves landed reasonably close to the threshold. I'm not going to finesse the touchdown here too much, we want to get the aircraft stopped, so touching down onto the brakes, going to full beta. And as expected, the Caravan coming to a stop in very short order there. Right, so we just got ourselves taxied here, clear of the runway. Running through the after landing checks, the flaps can come up. Ice protection is off, strobe lights, landing lights and taxi lights can go off. Transponder can go off, flaps are now indicating up. Fuel condition lever can go to low idle. And for the shutdown, the park brake is set, avionics masters can go off. Standby power is off, fuel boost is off, bleed air ventilation fans and air conditioning are all off, power lever is set to idle. ITT, we're looking for minimum temperature for 1 minute, which we've now had, we've been sat here for a little bit of time. So prop can come all the way back to fully feathered. Fuel condition lever can go to idle cutoff. Good run down there on the engine. The oxygen system is off. Lights can come off. Just wait until the props stop there to get the beacon off. Okay, it's a beacon off. We'll leave the nav lights on. Battery master is off. And that's our shutdown checklist complete. Just before we close up the review, we'll take a look at a couple more features of the aircraft, just to demonstrate some of the systems failures, and then as usual we'll wrap up, in this case with a fairly brief set of conclusions on the product. So I had actually hoped to show you a couple more failures here than we're going to be looking at. Namely, I had wanted to show you the hot battery and the battery overheat, but unfortunately I couldn't induce that again. And that is one area of the product where I would like to see some increased functionality. It would be nice to enable random failures and also perhaps programmable failures as well. Anyway, I couldn't force the hot battery, and I also tried pretty hard there to induce an engine failure, but I had no joy. According to the product documentation, as we discussed during the flight, you should be able to induce an engine failure, and I did double check and make sure that I have engine stress damage turned on in the sim. So as it stands, I would say you have to push the engine pretty hard to see any sort of damage effects. But nevertheless, failures are there. I have seen a couple myself, and the one we're going to be looking at here is a starter failure. We've had the engine cranking over for some time now, and exceeding the start limitations stated in the manual will actually lead to a starter generator overheat. So as demonstrated here, if you do run the starter for extended periods, ultimately you will suffer a failure. One last thing before we close up, we'll briefly run through the various avionics options on the aircraft. The Analog Caravan is compatible with the TDS GTN-XI as you've seen here today. It's also compatible with the PMS GTN 750. Further to that, the 208 can also be fitted with the default GNS 530. And for those who want a fully authentic steam gauge experience, you can also switch out the Garmin units for a simple radio stack. Additionally, there's also the option to have either 2 Garmin units, or you can have just the 1 unit with a more traditional COM2 and NAV2 radio. There's also the option to set up the Caravan in the amphibious configuration. There you can see the gear handle just on the left. The Caravan doesn't currently have any amphibious functionality, but Black Square have installed the controls nonetheless just to support any future modifications. Just to very briefly touch as well on the livery situation, the Black Square 208 is also compatible with any third-party repaints for the default Caravan. It will involve a little bit of work though, as you will have to rename some file structures to get the repaints to work with the aircraft. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Black Square Analog Caravan. A nice effort from the team overall, and whilst I would say that this video is as much a showcase as a review, we'll still talk through a few negative and positive points regarding the product. I would say that the 2 negatives that really stick out for me, firstly the doors still being inoperative. Fairly minor overall, and it wouldn't bother me personally, but I do think with a payware product that it's very reasonable to expect such functionality. As I mentioned during the flight, I presume that's as a result of using the default external model of the aircraft. And to be fair, that really was the only inoperable feature that I found internally on the aircraft. Even the armrests, the sun visors, everything was modelled. My other gripe with the product would be regarding the aircraft's flight model. As I mentioned during the flight, Black Square are very upfront about the fact that the flight model has only received minor alterations. At this sort of price point, I do think the Caravan would have benefited from a little bit more work on the flight model just to give the aircraft a slightly more study level feel overall. As we discussed during the approach, it would be difficult for me to say really just how many changes have actually been made versus the default flight model, but certainly the DNA of the aircraft still felt to be there in terms of how the aircraft actually flew. And again, for me, if the aim of the series is to overhaul the default aircraft, then it would certainly be nice to see a little bit more work, make the aircraft feel a little bit more study level in that department. Otherwise though, I thought the Analog Caravan from Black Square was a very nice effort for the most part. As someone who's not generally a big fan of glass cockpits, at least in the sim, it is nice to see some of our favourite aircraft being upgraded to steam gauges. And as I would hope this video has demonstrated to you, you're certainly getting some pretty major improvements in terms of aircraft systems. The gauges are of course nice, but I think where the product really shines is the general systems overhaul. The fidelity of the aircraft has been drastically improved. I was actually very surprised to see as much depth there as there was. The one area I would say is still somewhat lacking is the engine modelling. I was pretty impressed earlier on to see the hot battery leading to the battery overheat. The same goes with all of the modelled and functioning circuit breakers and their various system effects. It's nice as well to have the options for the PMS and the TDS GTN units. That certainly adds a lot more functionality to the aircraft. And without a doubt, the Analog Caravan is significantly improved over its default counterpart. The only other improvement that I would like to see that springs to mind, it would be nice to have some sort of tablet, perhaps as well the option to turn on or off random failures. It does feel to me as though Black Square missed a little bit of a trick there, given the amount of effort they put into the aircraft systems. But for now at least, failures seem to be purely based on how you as the user operate the aircraft. So overall I do think the Analog Caravan is a nice offering from Black Square and Just Flight. And as we've discussed, I do think that the Steam Gauge Overhaul series is a great idea. I'm certainly very much looking forward to the King Air, as that's an aircraft I really enjoy flying in the sim. I'm not such a big user of the Caravan personally. And hopefully we'll see Black Square continue on with the series, upgrading a few more default aircraft within the sim. Again though, I would just like to see some more flight model improvements perhaps in future products. Anyway, I think we covered off most of what I had to say there during the flight itself, so that should do us for today. As always guys, I do hope you enjoyed the video and found it to be of use. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. A very big thank you to Just Flight once again for letting us take a look at the Analog Caravan. And once again, a very big thank you to all of my channel members and patrons for all of your support. I do hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.